Apology to start with. I'm just getting over the mother of all sore throats, so if I sound a little scratchy tonight, sorry, but I'm going to soldier on. Nope, I need that light. Hello? I need that light on, please.
Okay.
All right. As Alfonso said, I write about history, but I really think of myself more as a storyteller. And here's the story for tonight. That's good. 463 years ago, on a day like today, it was a Wednesday, in a town not very far from here, about 60 miles away, town of Mani. This is a date that deserves to be bordered in black. On this day, the Spanish priests in the area had gathered a great pile of Maya cultural objects, statues and ritual objects, and probably costumes, ceremonial costumes, and also a number of books. The contemporary records vary. One of them says there were exactly 27 books. The other says more than 40, so we don't know. There was a lot of books. They assembled the people of the village and made a big pile of this stuff in the plaza in the middle of the town and set fire to it. I hope this shows up okay. This is an impression of the big bonfire that they set to burn all this stuff, 2,000 years of Mayan history. This is one of the Castro Pacheco murals from the government palace downtown here. The fellow who was in charge of this was a Franciscan called Diego de Landa. And this is what he wrote about it after the fire was over. He said, "We found a great number of books in these letters, and since they contained nothing but superstitions and falsehoods of the devil, we burned them all, which they regretted to an amazing degree and which gave them great pain." This condescending term, "these letters," refers to Maya writing. The Maya people were fully literate. They could read and write the sounds of their language. They probably inherited the roots of that from the Olmecs 3,000 years before. And there are a couple of traces of other writing systems around that we can't read because we don't know what language they're in. One is called the Muharra script and the other the Isthmian script. But the Maya, uniquely in America, as far as I know, developed the ability to read and write. The linguists say that the invention of writing happened in human history only 5 times, invented from scratch, and the Maya had one of them. So pretty remarkable, I think. The way it worked, just to give a very, very brief sample, they had symbols that represented syllables, consonant-vowel combinations. This is a page from a Maya syllabary. As you can see, the top line has got la, le, li, lo, lu, and so forth. They represented all the possible sounds of the language. Unlike modern languages that have a fixed alphabet and correct spelling and all that, the Maya often had several symbols that represented the same sound, and the scribe could exercise artistic creativity in which ones to use. The books they wrote were brush painted using symbols such as these on long strips of paper that were accordion folded. The paper was made out of the inner bark of a kind of fig tree that grows abundantly around here. It was coated with lime gesso to make a smooth, durable surface, a really good writing surface. Much better than the papyrus paper of the old world. It's a kind of paper called amate, which is the non-model word for it. The Maya word is which also means book. You can find samples of this paper as a kind of a craft object in gift shops around and such. It's still around. These were accordion folded into books about the size of a paperback, about 9 inches high by 4 inches wide, kind of a tall paperback. This form, the scholars call it a codex. And codex just means a book, a manuscript in the form of a book as opposed to a scroll. So codex means book. Don't be confused by that. These were brush painted mostly in red and black. Here's an image of a scribe at work on a plate, painting with a brush. Mostly red and black, and they added touches of brilliant colors, especially the famous Maya blue, which is made from indigo and a kind of clay. This is the place where the burning took place as a contemporary photograph of the main church, San Miguel Arcangel in Mani. Was built in the mid-1500s using stones looted from a previous Maya structure, as usual. Today, this is a small, obscure town down in the south of the state of Yucatán. But in the 16th century, it was a really important place. This was the headquarters, the capital of the Xiu dynasty, the people who ruled the western half of the peninsula. So kind of a big deal place. The Xiu people, when the Spanish invasion happened, they chose to ally themselves with the Spanish rather than fight. And it was in Mani that the Franciscans had some of their earliest successes in converting the people to their version of Christianity. So this was a really important place to them, a symbolic value of nothing else. The town of Mani. The fellow who oversaw the collection of the books and burning them was this guy, Diego de Landa. He was a pretty big wheel in the Catholic hierarchy here. We was called an ordinary, which he was in charge of conversion, and he reported directly to the bishop, so he was kind of a big deal. And Landa seemed to have developed an insatiable obsession with extirpating idolatry, by which he meant any sign of backsliding into the traditional Maya religion from Orthodox Christianity, which the people had accepted or been imposed on them. He really went on the attack looking for idolatry, exceeded all his authority, and instituted an inquisition to identify and public punish people he believed to be idolaters. These are people who had only heard of Christianity within a generation, and now they were to be punished for any slight observation of their ancient religion, just the slight recognition of the guardians of the household. Landa used severe torture, and under torture he could elicit admissions of anything he wanted to hear, basically. Idolatry, sacrifices, debauchery, witchcraft, whatever. He flogged people to death, he burned them, Contemporary accounts say the plaza at Mani was covered with blood, and happily I don't have any images of that. About 4,500 people, Maya people, were, quote, questioned by Landa. The records say 158 of them died in the process, and about 30 committed suicide to avoid encountering Landa. Unknown numbers fled into the forest to avoid him, to find refuge. And of course, the book burning was just part of the festivities. Landa's methods were so extreme that the bishop had Francisco de Toral, who was the first bishop of Yucatán, had him recalled to Spain for an inquiry. He had exceeded his authority by running an inquisition, which he wasn't supposed to do. He went back to Spain, and the civil authorities, the Council of the Indies, condemned him for what he'd been doing. But the Franciscans absolved him in kind of a defiant gesture of their independent authority versus the state. And furthermore, they gave him a promotion and sent him back to Yucatán. He sailed into Campeche in 1573 as the new bishop of Yucatán. And he brought with him 30 reinforcements, more Franciscans to help him with his holy work. These guys unleashed a wave of terror in Yucatán that lasted for 6 years. Violence and destruction. It just swept the peninsula from Campeche up to Motul and eastward over to the towns around Valladolid. The priests scoured the brush and the caves and the cenotes searching for any sign of idolatry. They didn't keep any records of their trials, which they kept out with, they carried out with complete disregard of the civil and ecclesiastical procedures. Torture was routine, of course. And in a few years, they imprisoned and punished thousands of people who had they convicted of the crime of idolatry. I don't think here's another image of what was going on, burning books and everything I could find. I don't think we can doubt that they found a lot more books and destroyed them. Landa's story is probably the best known from this era, but there were a lot of people doing the same sort of thing, just destroying artifacts and books. As one example, the lieutenant governor of Yucatán, Juan de Garzón, mounted an expedition in 1568 out of Salamanca de Bacalar, which perhaps you can see. Of course, Bacalar is still there beside its beautiful lake. But in these days, it was a poor, neglected military outpost surrounded by a sea of rebellious Maya. So Garzón mounted a military expedition west into what's now southern Campeche state, and then turned south and went up the Belize and Mopan rivers and across the Maya mountains into what's now northern Guatemala. And when he finished, he wrote this, among other things: many books of figures from their ancient days were everywhere to be found, and we burned them all. So there were hundreds of Maya books, maybe thousands, I don't know, we'll never know. What did they contain? We got some hints from contemporary writers who were there when all this was going on. For example, there was a respected historian called Jose de Acosta, who was there when the book still existed. And he wrote in Yucatan, there are various books which the learned Indians kept the accounts of their times and the knowledge of plants, animals, and other things of nature and their ancient customs. In a way of great interest and diligence, they lost many memories of the ancient things. So let's look at the survivors. We got a few survivors, not many. Excuse me. In order to understand anything about what the survivors, I have to do a little piece on the Maya calendar and astronomy. It's complicated, sorry. This will not be on the final exam. And I'll make it brief. The Maya calendar and astronomy were incredibly important to the Maya people because they believed there was a direct connection through those with the supernatural world and the human world. And these things controlled important things like rainfall and hunting success, health, agriculture, warfare. And they were required, in order to keep the universe running properly, they were required to do different ceremonies at various points in the calendar cycle and the astronomical cycles. So they were very careful to track these things. Just briefly, the Maya had two calendars that ran concurrently. One of them was the 365-day calendar, more close to a solar calendar, much like ours. It was divided into 18 months of 20 days each, and so the days were numbered like ours, 1st of January, 2nd of January, etc. So that's pretty straightforward. Running at the same time, there was a 260-day ritual calendar in parallel with the solar calendar, the civil calendar. We don't know where the 260 days came from, but it was widely used throughout Mesoamerica. Might be worth noting that 260 days is the typical length of the human gestation period. So maybe there's something to that, I don't know. The ritual calendar had 20-day names and the numbers 1 through 13. So it was like 1 Monday, 2 Tuesday, 3 Wednesday, and so forth. But as the numerology works out with 20 days and 13 numbers, there were no repeats. So in the full 260-day calendar, there were no 2 days that had the same number and name. Interesting, eh? I thought it'd be fun to look up what today's date is, and it is 13 Muluk, 12 Posh in the two calendars. So every day had two numbers and 2 names, the month and the day. And on top of this, there was a 9-day cycle, by the way, of the Lords of the Night that was on top of this, which I didn't bother to look that up. They also had the so-called long count, which was the number of days and months and years and decades and centuries and millennia since the day of creation, which of course was August 11th, 3114 BC. This date was used on the monuments to establish legitimacy, not so much in the codices, but anyway, the total number of days since creation. They also spent very careful attention to the Venus cycle, equally important. That is the 584-day cycle by which Venus sometimes is in the morning sky and sometimes the evening sky, and there's periods in between when it's not visible. Venus was thought to be the war star. It gave signs and prophecies about wars. So it was important to know people might be attacked or they might be called upon to attack somebody else. And, war was alarmingly prevalent through Maya history. So Venus was a really important one. They also paid attention to the positions of the other 4 visible planets. And of course the moon, the phases and the progress of the moon through the Maya zodiac. They can also calculate rare events such as eclipses. My point with all this is that it's really complicated. Nobody could remember all this stuff, so they had to write it down. And I think that's probably the ancient origin of the books. They had to write this stuff down. It was really important to them, and they had to have some way to keep records of it and remember it. The surviving examples of the authentic examples of Maya books that we have, it's a very small number. There's no reason to think that they're necessarily representative of the hundreds that once existed. They are mostly almanacs and astronomical tables to keep track of this stuff I was talking about. They contain celestial events and ceremonies that need to be performed at various times, prophecies, all related to the ritual calendar. The texts in the books are short and cryptic. They're abundantly illustrated with pictures of gods doing various ceremonial acts and natural phenomena. The lost books no doubt had greater variety, and we've seen some evidence of that from the Akona quote that I mentioned earlier. So we lost a lot of Maya history. But one could ask, what's the big deal? Why is this important? We lost the books. We have lots of other Maya writing. If you've ever been to any of the classic Maya sites, Copan, Palenque, Tikal, Gachilan, whatever, I know you've been impressed with all the writing. The buildings are covered with writing. Those tombstone-shaped monuments they put up called stelas or stelae, like this one at Copan, are covered with writing. This is the amazing tablet of the 96 glyphs from Palenque. Lots and lots of writing. This is all political propaganda. The other source of writing we have is the ceramics. A lot of ceramic items have texts on them, like this beaker. This is from a site near Calakmul. And you can see there's a script along the top red edge here. Almost all the writings on ceramics are dedication formulas. It's called a primary standard sequence, and there's almost nothing other than these formal dedications. Say something like presented by X to Y on the occasion of Z. So this and the political stuff on the stones and occasional wood carving are really helpful for understanding the dynastic succession and histories, and to some extent the relations between the elite people in the various cities. But we don't learn much about everyday life and stuff that's important to the people, and that was that was unfortunately lost to us. Well, let's see here. Of the authentic surviving Maya books, there are only 4 left out of the hundreds. And only 2 of those really have much information in them. These were written between the years 1000 and 1500, and they're known today by the archives where they reside. The Dresden Codex is in a state library in Germany, the Sächsische Landesbibliothek. Madrid Codex is in the Museo de America, obviously in Madrid. Paris Codex is in the Bibliothèque Nationale of France, and the so-called Maya Codex of Mexico is in the Biblioteca Nacional, which is on the National University campus in Mexico City. High-quality images of all of these are available on the internet. The best ones are at the FOMSI website, the Foundation for the Advancement of Mesoamerican Studies. So with that little bit of background about what the books are and what they contain, let's look briefly at the 4 we got. This is 2 pages from the Dresden Codex. 74 pages, painted on both sides. This is the most artistically complex of the surviving codices. Remember, this thing is 9 inches high. So the degree of detail here and the artistry that the scribe created in doing this is quite remarkable, I think. This contains astronomical information, especially accurate stuff about the Venus cycle. It has a lot of poetic language about the passage of the moon goddess, that is the moon, through the stars of the Maya zodiac, and the effects that has on things, mostly food availability. It mentions the rain god, Chak, a lot. Of course, we know that's a scarce commodity in this part of the world. There are correlations for eclipses, and a ritual calendar of royal events. This book is the work of 6 scribes. It was written about the year 1100. It's written in the Yucatán language, in the Itza dialect. So it was almost certainly written in Chichen Itza. How it got to Dresden, we don't know, but we do know that Cortés gave a book to Charles V, the King of Spain, as a tribute gift in 1519. And Charles was also the Holy Roman Emperor. So maybe that's the route by which it found its way into the Germanic world, we don't know. Tragically, the Dresden Codex was badly damaged by water during the bombing of Dresden in 1945. With the help of my able assistant here, this is a complete replica of the Dresden Codex. Pretty cool. It's okay. You're welcome to take a look at this and after, if we can get it folded back up. Et voilà. Moving on, the Madrid Codex. This thing has 112 pages. It's 22 feet long, almost 7 meters long. And its content is even more varied than the Dresden. This is the work of one scribe. The speculation is nothing but that, is that maybe it was prepared rapidly after the Spanish arrived in order to capture text and images from several different sources before the Spanish got to them. But that's controversial. There's other guesses that it was written in Tayasal, the island town in Lake Bikini-Sal in Guatemala. No, Flores, Guatemala. Speculation. This, of course, contains almanacs and horoscopes and lots of gods and rituals. This contains a lot more stuff about gods related to everyday acts, about beekeeping and hunting and weaving and stuff like that. I think these guys down here may be making pottery. So there's some insight into everyday life in this one. Our Maya Museum up in the north of the city has a really excellent replica of the Madrid Codex, which is worth taking a look at. The Paris Codex, only 22 pages. Some pages are lost, in very poor condition, contains prophecies in a Maya zodiac, not a lot of new stuff. Incredibly, this was rescued from a wastebasket full of discarded paper in the Bibliothèque Nationale in 1859. We don't know its provenance. Some of the scholars think it's from western Yucatán, maybe the Mayapan area. The astronomical data looks like it's from the 9th century, but this has doubtless been copied in later times. We don't know when. We know very little about this one. It's not much of it's left. And fourth one, even more so. This one looks really different. The so-called Maya Codex of Mexico. This one came to light only in the 1960s. It was discovered by looters in a cave in Chiapas. And somehow it came into the possession of the famous Mayanist from Yale University, Michael Coe. Coe smuggled it out of Mexico and exhibited it for the first time in 1971 at a conference at the Grolier Club in New York City. And for years it was known as the Grolier Codex. It finally got repatriated to Mexico. The authorities wondered for years whether it's authentic or not. It looks pretty different from all the others. But the authorities have confirmed now that it's the real thing, using carbon dating and all that kind of stuff. And it dates from the early post-classic, that is between 1000 and 1100, so this is probably the oldest of the four surviving ones. There's 16 surviving pages which are not in order. The looters took the pages apart and mixed them up. So they're not in sequence. It's kept in a vault. It's not on display because it's in such fragile condition. The pages we have don't contain any text, only numbers and dates, mostly about the Venus cycle and God's performing act. Because these God figures are larger than the others, we can see a little more what they're doing. This is one of the solar gods, of which there were several. And he has just used this atlatl to fire a burning dart into this building here. There's the flames coming up. This is the Mayan death god, and he's best known as Kimi. He has several other names. But Kimi, he's recognizable by his necklace of eyeballs and the flint blade that's stuck in his nose. He's just used this big knife to decapitate this unfortunate individual here. So You get some idea of what the illustrations of the god showed. This was the work of one scribe. It was doubtless made in Chiapas, and it's clearly Maya in style and content, but there seems to be some Mixtec influence from the next state up in Oaxaca. For example, here's the Mixtec, the central Mexican notation for the number 12, which is just 12 dots. And here's the same number in Maya bar dot notation, so there's some Mixtec influence there. Well, the Maya mourned their loss of all their treasured books, and after the Spanish introduced the Latin alphabet for a way to write the Mayan languages, they wrote down as much as they could remember from the lost codices. In the books in Yucatán, they're collectively known as the books of Chilam Balam. Chilam means priest or prophet, and Balam, of course, means jaguar. It's also a pretty common Maya surname. So I guess it's possible this could have been an individual who was famous for starting this. I think it's more likely a kind of a ritual title. The Maya were like to do that, to pick up what looked like a personal name and reuse that for other people all of later. Itzá rulers, for example, were called Ahaukanek. They all had the same name. That means Lord, Sky Serpent. There are other Latin alphabet works written in other languages, Cachiquel and Quiche most famously. You probably heard of the Popol Vuh, the Quiche creation myth. Our library, according to the catalog, our library has 5 copies of that by different translators. It's kind of an interesting read. It's not that difficult to get through. The translation by Dennis Tedlock is the best if you want to look at it. But I'm going to stay with the Yucatec material, which seems to me to be the closest, most closely related to the codices. There are 9 of these that we know about for sure. They're known by the towns where they were found. They were hidden, I guess, to keep them from the priests. I've heard of at least 6 others that may exist or may be spurious or may have been lost. We don't know. I don't doubt there's more of them out there hidden, but we know about these 9. The 5 with the check marks are available in English translation. This is a full translation of the Chilambalam of Tisimin in Yucatec in English with abundant footnotes and scholarly commentary. And anyway, if you want to see what they're like. It's pretty difficult to get through, frankly. It's written in very short, cryptic phrases with symbolic, poetic language. I think it's possible that at least some of the codices were meant to be used that way. Were meant to be prompts or outlines for an orator to read. We have a lot of examples through history of Maya priests reading aloud from sacred books to crowds of attentive people. From colonial times well into the 20th century. Some of the holdout villages in backcountry Quintana Roo, it was still going on in the 1950s, so they probably got some more books there that we don't know about. The subjects in these things ranges widely. A lot of it is placed in the context of the Maya calendar. But here's an example of some of the kind of stuff that's in there. I won't read it all to you. Chronicles, agricultural texts, medical recipes, mythology, history, riddles and songs, meteorology, astrology. There's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, this is the full literature of a people. Quite remarkable. This is probably a poor and incomplete record for all the stuff we lost, but there's a lot there, and it was all burned. There's some pages from the actual Chilam Balam books. Nope, the bottom part is cut off. On the left is from the Chilam Balam of Shumayel, and it's about eclipses. The one in the middle is the Ishil book, and it's a list of illnesses and herbal remedies. And the third one is from Tekash, and it too is about medicinal plants and somehow relates those to the calendar, or the way that I can understand. So a lot of stuff there. I mean, full literature, all burned. Book burning has continued to be popular, and it's worth recognizing that. At about the same time this stuff was going on in Yucatán, Martin Luther was burning Catholic books in Wittenberg that he thought were too representative of Catholic orthodoxy in his reform. One of my favorite villains is a fellow called Anthony Comstock, who was a self-appointed vice reformer in the United States. He proudly claimed to have burned 15 tons of books. The seal for the society he founded proudly shows a man burning books. He burned anatomy textbooks for medical students. He burned Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. He was especially interested in burning anything that contained advice on contraception. Of course, you know, the Nazis burned books. They kicked it off in 1933 with a nationwide event where they recruited university students from 34 different schools to have the bonfires for them. They burned, of course, anything by a Jewish writer, Kafka, Freud, Einstein. They burned books by socialists ranging from Karl Marx to Helen Keller. They burned mainstream writers who they judged to be leftists, people like Hemingway and Jack London and Upton Sinclair. In 1950 in the United States, during the Red Scare, there were public burnings of books that people thought were pro-communist. At that time, the writer Ray Bradbury wrote his dystopian novel Fahrenheit 451, envisioning a world when it was illegal to read books and they were all burned. The library has a copy. It's pretty terrifying. It's still going on. I read that Christians are burning copies of Harry Potter books because they promote witchcraft. Yeah. So what's it all mean? It's a sign of society's lack of confidence in itself. Maybe paranoia about different ideas. I understand from the library staff here that occasionally they get a request from a patron for that a book be removed because it is somehow unacceptable to them. And of course they're tossed out into the street, I think. So, you know, let's be proud of ourselves that we're in a library here that practices tolerance and inclusion. Let's just read anything we want to and make up our own mind. I want to finish up with a very brief epilogue on our friend Landa. His violent campaign came to an end finally when he died in 1579 here in Merida. He was 54 years old. His remains were placed in the big religious complex that was where the Lucas de Galvan's market is now, the Convento Grande in San Francisco. It was built on the base of a Maya pyramid, one of the five that the Spanish found here when they moved in, decided to name it Merida. And sometime later, his bones were removed to the family tomb in Spain, a town called Cifuentes. During the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, the tomb was destroyed. It was demolished, erased, vanished. So there's no trace of our Landa left on Earth. If I believed in an afterlife, I would like to think him in some particularly uncomfortable part of Shivaba, the Maya underworld. Anyway, thanks folks. I'll be glad to take questions and comments. I have to do a brief commercial message. This is a story and one of many in this book about Yucatan history, which is available for your, we have a limited number of copies, available for your consideration back there after it's over. Questions? Thank you. Yes, Peter.
Where did Landa learn the Mayan language?
He was a smart guy. He learned, I may need a translator here to understand people. He was a smart guy. He learned the language. He was one of the first priests to come over, and he taught himself. He was